Pleasure to welcome you to Panther Hall and to this wonderful afternoon session that we're going to have with our distinguished alumnus, Preet Bharara. I have a few thank yous and introductions to do initially before I introduce the two panelists who are going to be here today for what we're billing as a fireside chat. There is no fire, but you can imagine one in the background. But I have a few people I want to recognize who are here today. I want to begin with recognizing Dr. Bharara and his wife, Dr. Bharara, if you would stand to be recognized. And for those of you who are alumni who grew up in this area, Monmouth County, friends of the school, many of you know Dr. Bharara and his practice in Asbury Park. He was a pediatrician here for many, many years. And of course, father to two distinguished alumni in Preet and also Preet, both who graduated from many schools. So we're delighted to have Dr. Bharara here tonight, or this afternoon, and his wife as well. This afternoon, we also are going to have the pleasure, early evening, of inducting a member to our Hall of Fame here, a formal faculty member, and I want to introduce her briefly and her family, Dr. Barbara Tomlinson. Among the many things that I know Dr. Tomlinson has done in her distinguished career is teaching a number of alumni who've gone on to great careers, and certainly among those, Preet Bharara. So Preet will actually be inducting Dr. Tomlinson this afternoon, this evening, over in the GPA. We're delighted about that. She was a teacher here for many years, 17 years, a distinguished teacher in American history, American literature, recently AP history, I think, as well. So we're so delighted to have her here. A few other recognitions. I saw Frank Pallone, Congressman Pallone is here, who's a past parent. We want to recognize him as well. So again, without further ado, we want to get started this afternoon. Again, I'll just make one comment about our mission here is to instill in students the ability to lead, create, and contribute. And that third part, contribution meaningfully to society, that is what we're talking about this afternoon. In Preet Bharara, we have an alum who clearly demonstrates civic engagement, involvement in politics with a broad spectrum in America. Somebody who has really been engaged in public service over his career since graduating from Randy. So we're delighted to have him. And with that, he will be introduced by the chair of our history department, Mark DiGiovanni, one of our distinguished teachers. So with that, Mark and Preet Bharara.
Our guest tonight served as the Assistant U.S. Attorney in New York, after which he was appointed by President Barack Obama to be the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. During that time, his office prosecuted high volume of cases, including things related to terrorism, arms trafficking, financial and healthcare fraud, cybercrime, public corruption, etc. Prior to his time in the SDNY, he was also the chief counsel for Senator Chuck Schumer, and was also the chief counsel and staff director for the Senate Judiciary Committee Subcommittee on Administrative Oversight and Courts, something that in 2012, he graced the cover of Time magazine as the man busting Wall Street, and was listed by that same publication as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. A status also noted by other publications such as Bloomberg Magazine, Vanity Fair, and others. Throughout his career, he has used his voice to advocate for justice, against corruption, and in support of public service. That continues today on his podcast, Stay Tuned with Preet by Cafe. It focuses on issues of justice and fairness, as well as on Twitter, which has been quite active as of late. But of course, before all of that, he was a lifer, graduate, and valedictorian of Randy School's class of 1986. So we have a number of students in attendance here. I see some of them around. So just for their benefit, some of them might be interested in following a similar career path. I was hoping that you'd be able to enlighten them on how you went from graduation stage at Randy, which I know is not the same stage that we're in now, and ended up as somebody appointed to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
How much time you got? First, I want to say thank you for having me. In many ways, you love the school you went to more after you leave it. I don't have to take any tests in this environment anymore. I didn't wear a tie. I apologize for that. It's my one overdue 32-year-old late rebellion against the school. They don't wear a tie and jacket in school.
I choose to, but the students do generally don't.
They don't. It's very radical these days.
I know.
So I left Miami in 1986. I always wanted to be a lawyer from some of the things that I studied and read about in high school and in what they now call middle school here. Went to law school, and what was your question again? How did I get from Miami to being
Yeah, generally, just what was the third guy?
Straight line.
Yeah.
Look, the career path for anyone, if you're a young person here, I think, is do what's interesting. If you overly plot out, we have lots of brilliant people who go to school here, and you think, I'm going to be the President of the United States, or I'm going to be in the type of industry, you can plan too much. I like to always give the story about the contrast between me and my brother. We had pretty much the same trajectory. We both went to Ranney, we graduated 3 years apart. I was a valedictorian. He was an awful student, only a salutatorian. We both went to very good colleges. We both ended up at Columbia Law School. We both ended up at law firms, New York large law firms, and we both went to smaller law firms. And he decided he wanted to do more work in business, and many of you know the story. I then became the United States Attorney and had subpoena power, so I thought I won the competition in the very highly competitive Indian American immigrant family. My brother then decided he wanted to do this other thing, and he began selling diapers on the internet, which made my parents very proud. After neither of their children became doctors, my father's a pediatrician. They got one kid in the government and the other kid selling diapers on the internet. And then my brother ended up selling his company. Well, actually, before that, he sold diapers. I don't know if he sold diapers on the internet, but sold them under the slogan, "We're number one in number two." Which made my parents even, they're right there. It made my parents even, the older folks laughed more at that joke than the younger folks. And then he ended up selling the company to Amazon for $540 million. Yes. I get it too. And the point of that meandering story is just to say, do what you like, do what makes you happy, whether it makes money or not. I mean, my brother didn't set out, and Mark, his classmate, best friend from Ranney, started this company called Actors.com and built it into something big. And then Mark has gone on to found Jet.com, sold that. I assume everyone knows the stories of these illustrious alumni, not the one on the stage. He sold Jet.com to Walmart for $3.3 billion. And I never saw my brother or Mark, and I never felt that I was doing anything for a specific next job promotion, or certainly me, not for the money. You do things that interest you at the time that those opportunities arise. And if you plan too much, then maybe you make a wrong turn. So for example, I always wanted to be an assistant U.S. attorney, and I thought that would be the best job in the world, because your only job as a prosecutor, I think, is to wake up every morning and do the right thing. And you never have to represent someone who you don't believe. You never have to take a position that you don't believe. You never have to make an argument in court that you don't believe. And that's kind of gratifying. And most people don't get an opportunity like that. But I never had any thoughts of anything grander than that. I thought that was pretty grand itself. And then an opportunity presented itself. Out of the blue, Senator Schumer, who was more junior than at the time, back in 2004, apparently was looking for someone to be his chief counsel. And someone said to me, I understand the Senator's looking for someone. Do you want to do that? I don't know what that is. Once I find out, maybe I'll think about it in an interview. And it happened to be the time sort of apropos this week. So maybe this is a good anecdote to tell. It's the end of 2004, and I'm very happy being assistant U.S. attorney. I'm an organized crime prosecutor, prosecuting also apropos today, Russian organized crime, Italian organized crime, some Chinese organized crime in Lower Manhattan. And I thought I would never leave that job. But the thing that was swirling around in the country at the end of 2004 was this belief that there were going to be one or more vacancies on the Supreme Court. And the job that I was thinking about, and that had come up out of the blue, was to be the chief counsel to a significant senator on the committee that you've all been hearing about a lot this week. And it turned out to be great. And there had been no vacancy in the court in 11 years. Right? The most static court, I think, during the entire history of the country, is with the exception maybe at the beginning of the Republic. And it turns out that I cared about the court and cared about the issues of the court and thought it would be a nice spot at the sort of seat of history to work in the Senate at that time, and ended up being correct. So during the 4.5 years I worked in the Senate, including that first year, 2005, and the beginning of 2006, there were 2 Supreme Court vacancies. Senator O'Connor stepped down, and then Chief Justice Rehnquist passed away just a few months later. And so I have some familiarity with all the things you're seeing here. And I took that job not because I thought it was going to lead to something else. I thought it was an interesting opportunity that would challenge me and cause me to grow in ways that I didn't even know that I needed to grow. And I did that job, and it turns out that if you work well and do a good job and impress your boss, and your boss happens to be the senior senator from the state of New York, and then the Democratic president happens to get elected, maybe you get recommended to be the United States Attorney in Southern District of New York. But when people try to reverse engineer my career, I wasn't thinking about that, right? And I certainly wasn't thinking about, becoming the United States Attorney as a very significant and important and wise and clever, sort of stepping stones to being a podcast host. My plan all along. So it's a long-winded way of saying I didn't have a particular career trajectory other than knowing I wanted to be a lawyer, and other than knowing I deeply wanted to be in public service as a lawyer.
So then once you ended up in the U.S. Attorney's Office, you were able to work on all these things that were mentioned in the election, and briefly mentioned here, or described on other things. Obviously, you're not in that position anymore.
I'm not. Yes, I was fired. We can talk about that.
Well, I actually was more interested in, if you were still in that position, are there certain things that you wish you could still be working on?
Yes. For example, the United States versus Michael Cohen. That would be an interesting case to be working on. Yeah.
So even when we think back to prior to the election of 2016, was there a particular issue that you really loved to get into? Something along those lines.
So I get asked all the time a variation of that question, which is, what case are you proudest of, what area were you most interested in? Sure. And that's like asking which child you love the most. When I get asked that question, it's the middle one. I love the middle one. Joke, and they're not here. I love all the stuff we did. I think one of the great things, a half cop-out answer, and I'll sort of answer your question in a less cop-out way. I think the greatness of my office, and not because I led it, because this is what they knew how to do. We have the best lawyers in the country by a lot. I think we're the best U.S. officers in the country by a lot. And that's parochial pride, but I think also objectively true if you look at the track record. And at any given time, we're not just doing sort of the 2 things that the office historically has been known for, and that is terrorism prosecutions, the national security side, because New York City is and always has been, and perhaps will be for a long time, a central target for you name the terrorist organization of the time, whether it was ISIS or Al-Qaeda back in the day. And the second, financial fraud, because Wall Street literally sits in our history. But we don't pay a lot of mind to geographical borders. The nickname of my old office is Southern New York. The nickname is the Sovereign District of New York. My dad would ask me all the time, how are you arresting people from other countries all the time? And I answer by giving a small anecdote. Someone once asked me, the Inspector General of a particular agency in New York, remind me again what your jurisdiction is. And I said, are you familiar with Earth? That's how we sort of thought about it, because if any portion of the crime was directed towards or took place in the Southern District of New York, given the banks that we have and given the ability of wire transfers and phone calls and everything else, then we were able to prosecute the case. The more direct answer to your question, not that I like these cases more than any other kind of case, but I think the area in which during my time we probably had the most dramatic increase in a certain kind of case, which makes your blood boil a little bit, is public corruption. And public corruption is something that you can solve not just by prosecution, It takes, I say all the time, you can't prosecute your way out of any social problem. That includes the opioid crisis, that includes terrorism, that includes Wall Street corruption, and that also includes political corruption. But during my time, we prosecuted the leaders of both the New York State Assembly, who's a Democrat, Sheldon Silver, also the leader of the Senate, the New York State Senate, Dean Scalos. They had to be retried because of a Supreme Court case that hurt the prosecution. We also prosecuted, I think, more state legislators and members of the city council in various places than anyone had, I think, going back generations in that office. And the reason why public corruption, I think, is more upsetting in some ways than other crimes is that public corruption affects every single person who lives in the jurisdiction, right? So if somebody who's a leader in New York State, it doesn't matter if you vote or not. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. It doesn't matter if you care about politics or not. You can't escape the harm that you face from having someone corrupt in office. If someone's taking bribes and accepting quid pro quos, then you are harmed by that. And democracy is harmed by that. And faith in what democracy can do is harmed by that. And in a lot of cases that were a big deal, $1 billion cases with a lot of bad folks in prison, but the reaction I got from the public and on the street in New York, when we started bringing case after case after case, alleging public corruption and then convicting these people was head and shoulders beyond the reaction about any other case. Because I think if there's something about that that resonates with people and makes them angry. You work for us. We voted for you. You work for us. And if you work for us, you don't cheat us. You don't steal from us. And so I think we need greater emphasis in a lot of different places in the country at the moment on public corruption. So if I were still there to answer your original question, I'd be doubling down on those things.
Sort of along those lines now, when you're outside of the system, have you ever considered going back into public service?
Well, I thought for a while, so New York, keep talking about New York, but New York is a suburb of New Jersey. And Bruce Springsteen. So Eric Schneiderman was, resigned from office. He was the New York State Attorney General because he did some horrible things. And I had not planned to think that I'd come back to public service. I'm doing this podcast. I'm writing a book. I'm almost done with the book. I'm an analyst on CNN. I teach at NYU Law School. I have a number of other projects that I'm pursuing. And so now all of a sudden there's an open seat. And so for maybe a couple of weeks I thought about it. Because I think public service is important. I think it was a natural fit, given the kind of work I've done. I worked with that office. But, I don't like politics. And I don't like some politicians. The idea of running for office in a way that requires calling people up, my friends would be happy to know this, calling people up and asking them for dough is not something that appeals to me. I think maybe there could come a time if you could figure out a way to do it and not compromise yourself and not have to get in the muck. And if there's a lot of muck, I think it's a noble service. I work for a politician. I work for the most significant politician in New York, I believe, for 4.5 years, Chuck Schumer, and I admire him greatly, and he works his heart out. But it takes a certain kind of personality to do that. I don't have an objection to being in public office. I do at the moment. I have an objection to doing what I think we must do with the terrible system that we have, that's money-driven, to get into that position. That could change, but at the moment, that's where I am.
Do you think that public financing of elections will go along with
among other things, yeah. Look, and there's smaller things we can do. A friend of mine, look, I have other U.S. attorneys, colleague friends who run for office. A lot of them. The woman I got sworn in with on the same day as U.S. attorney in Seattle is a good friend of mine. And she has similar she yelled at me about not running for AG because a similar thing happened to her. She was in practice in Seattle, and then the mayor of Seattle actually had to leave office in connection with personal scandal as well. And then she got elevation against 16 people, and now she's the mayor of Seattle. But what's interesting about how you run for office in Seattle is, so I asked her the question, we had dinner a few weeks ago, and I said, and how much time do you have to spend raising money? It's a small example of a thing that you could do to make it a little bit better. And she's in her first or second year as mayor in Seattle. She said, I spent zero at the time, so I guess you don't want to be reelected, do you? She said, the reason I don't spend any time on it is the law in Seattle is people who are elected to office or plan to run for office are not allowed to campaign for money, for funds. They're not allowed to raise money for the first 2 years of the 4-year term. So you're free enough to spend all your time actually caring about the people's work and caring about your constituents. That's an example of the thing. Also, the amount of money you can spend in some places is very limited. That's also a good thing. And then there are things that can be done. I also think it's possible if you have the right message, and you have the right time, and the right runway, which I did not have. I don't think normal areas that I'm thinking about doing this. Like that old work, what the people are following in Texas, who shuns a certain kind of money and raises a different kind of money, small amounts of money from various sources. I think there's a way to do that, but I think a lot has to change before that's available universally around the country.
Well, for example, in Seattle, it's a relatively small race in the longer term, whereas for say U.S. House seat, the term is only 2 years, so you have to somehow change the rules there. I'm not sure.
I mean, if you're a House member, you have to basically run nonstop.
Exactly.
Yeah, but look, I still stay involved. I didn't run for office, run for that office, but I was asked to moderate the last debate. So I moderated the last debate, and I had two thoughts. Maybe I'll share one of the two thoughts. There's a lot of robust, fair exchange of ideas and criticism and tough back and forth, which I think is right. You get in the public arena. I was in a different kind of public arena. I took a lot of shots. I don't mind that. You go up against Al Qaeda or billionaire Wall Street people. It's not horseshit, right? So I don't have a fear of combat. But there's a certain disingenuousness about, I'm not casting aspersions on any of those 4 particular people, but there's a certain kind of barbed nastiness that you see in politics that I don't like. And so when I was moderating the debate, there were good issues discussed, there was a back and forth, and there was a healthy exchange of ideas, and people debated things that they had different views on. But there was also a bit of, BS and nastiness that I think is unbecoming, and I don't necessarily want to stick to it. I used to say when people ask this question, I have no intention of entering politics in the same way I have no intention of joining the circus. I didn't mean that kind of humorously, but a little bit of that is true.
So, sort of bouncing off of a number of the ideas that you put forward there, and all ideas of anti-political corruption and just generally justice and fairness. First, what do you think instilled those particular ideals in you, and then what are you doing now to further those ideas?
A few of them are sitting here. My mom, my dad, the greatest teacher I've ever had, Dr. Thompson. Having a thing for later. Look, I think your values come from your upbringing, and I think maybe some people, have them in their DNA. I'm not sure that that's true. And when you grow up in a household, in a school, not just with Dr. Thompson, but lots of folks, the things that you read, the things that are emphasized, there's a virtue that people don't talk about so much. And I'm writing this book and sort of thinking about these themes, and it's not necessarily related to morality, and that virtue is work. Hard work and professionalism. It's incredibly important. One of the reasons that the U.S. Attorney's Office does as well as it does is, everyone has a good moral character, I think. They have a good compass, but they also work really hard. They also don't cut corners. They also make sure that they are sure of what they're doing and what they're saying. And it's like, honesty, I'm meandering all over the place, but my own high school. This crisis we're having about honesty in the country is a little bit about character, I think. It's a little bit about whether or not folks are just liars or not liars. It's also a little bit about work and preparation. To be honest about something is in some cases a sign that you have spent the time to look at what the facts are, to have read a book, to have studied an article, to have been curious and asked other people, what do you think about this? And it's not always the case that there's a bad person who's lying and doing terrible things. It's often they're a lazy person who doesn't work hard, who had things handed to them. And so, not just the fact that my parents always taught us, my brother to do the right thing, and if we were ever naughty, there were tremendously serious consequences. It's not just that. It's that the ethic that they both model about working hard and doing the right thing, those things I don't think we think enough about how much those things go hand in hand. I have some stories that I'm going to tell in this book about miscarriages of justice, and not every miscarriage of justice happens because somebody wanted to do the wrong thing. Some miscarriages of justice happen because a lot of people are responsible for something, whether it's the shuttle or it's a fingerprint identification in a story that I tell in the book. And if enough people, where discretion is sort of spread thin, right, responsibility is spread thin, if enough people deviate a little bit from excellence and from trying to be perfect and think someone else will be responsible, it's not going to be on me. If enough good people, by the way I'm saying, who act in good faith, who do a decent job every day, but not an excellent job, and not as hard a job as they might be able to do, terrible things happen to other folks. And so a little bit, I would like to emphasize that aspect of it, because I was around people, both at the school, the culture was to work hard, and to be careful, and to be precise, and my parents taught me the same thing.
There's one more question I want to make sure I ask, and then get some from the audience. I think it's more just a second. With the fire hose of news that has been coming at us for the last at least 2.5 years, I joke with some of my students sometimes that I remember when there used to be slow news days. There just hasn't been in so long. But as a result of that, everybody seems to have this idea that they're now experts in constitutional law. Whether it be the Anonymous Clause or the 20th Amendment or whatever. There's a lot of armchair legal scholars. So my question to you is, but is there something that you either see online or see on the news or just read about that you wish people understood better, that they clearly have no understanding of?
Well, I think a lot of things.
Well, we're concerned about this question.
Yes. I think it was mentioned, so I have this podcast, and it's become incredibly popular. And I'm sort of surprised by it. I mean, far more popular and listened to. I mean, we have many hundreds of thousands of people listen every week. Actually, listen twice a week. Listening to it, it's like a boring former government official. I think part of the reason is this hunger that people have that you're describing. The news is coming at you so fast. It's important to your life, right? It's important to how you think about your country. People are very upset a lot. On both sides, by the way. I don't think there are two sides anymore, but putting that aside for a moment. And they're sort of in panic. And so the nicest compliment I get about the podcast is people say it calms us down, or I find it reassuring, and I feel a little bit less panicked about the country, which I didn't really get until I began thinking about it. I mean, how can that be so? Because I'm not really saying everything is going to be great. Because when bad things happen, I think the rule of law has been under attack and under siege for a while, in a way that's very upsetting to me. And I say that. But I think there are two things going on with people who are not feeling calm in the country if they care about what's happening. And one is they're afraid that institutions are being undermined, or they were too polarized. But the second thing is they don't understand the jargon that they hear on television. And people get on and they say, well, there's a 25th Amendment, and people say, well, there's impeachment, and people say, there should be an investigation, or not an investigation with respect to the Supreme Court. I mean, all this stuff gets said, but no one explains it to anybody. And there are people of good faith who are intelligent, who are civic-minded, and who are great citizens, who care about their country. But in the same way, they may not know how to operate on something. They may not know how a legal proceeding unfolds. And so the one thing that we provide, I think, on the show is that gives people comfort is explaining what it is that happened in a way that hopefully is not partisan, is fair, you don't yell, and is something larger than what you get from a 5-minute sound bites on the television. How do I belong away from your question?
I think it's good.
All right.
So I'm going to mix in some audience questions.
Okay.
So, let's see. Tim Foley wants to know, how, now that we're 10 years following the financial crisis, how would you assess the actions of the government and the banks? And we have about half.
Look, I think it's an important reminder that terrible things happened 10 years ago. For my own part, part of the spirit of the question I assume is, why were there certain kinds of criminal prosecutions? I spent a long time talking about that. It's frustrating to a lot of people, including to the people whose job it was to police the markets, and to hold people accountable criminally or otherwise. And people had committed crimes and there was an opportunity to prove them guilty of crimes, but it takes a certain kind of evidence. that takes a certain kind of evidence of a particular mental state that's not always available. And so you didn't see those kinds of prosecutions. You also didn't see, by the way, any sort of significant regulatory action against the heads of finance institutions because nobody could find the evidence. That seems odd, and it seems frustrating, and it seems upsetting, which I get. But lots and lots of people who had every incentive to try to find proof beyond a reasonable doubt, or in the regulatory side, even just a preponderance of evidence, couldn't find the particular evidence against folks. The second issue, though, is, and I'm less expert on these other things, on how the economy should or should not work, I don't know that a lot of lessons have been learned with respect to how big the banks are, with respect to how much regulation we should have. I don't think Dodd-Frank was a panacea. I don't think that fixed everything. But I do think, and I don't think the CFPB, which is the creation of law after the financial crisis, was now under attack. I don't think it's a panacea either. But I do believe in undoing Dodd-Frank. I do believe undoing the CFPB's mandate and taking its teeth away is definitely bad. And I trust the opinion of a lot of experts who say, if we're not careful about being profligate, if we're not careful about reining in corporate greed, we're going to be up for something like that again. I just don't know.
So you sort of to that end, you talked a lot about how within the Department of Justice, specifically within the U.S. Attorney's offices, that there's an independence there that allows them to make some of those, or lead some of those efforts in ways when politicians maybe aren't necessarily on board. Maybe you speak a little bit to that. Is that independence really there? Is there anything that they can do?
I think generally about all kinds of things. One of the things that I think is under attack is the independence of the press, the independence of the judiciary, and also the independence of the law enforcement function. Now, I don't think we're in that much trouble in the country with respect to the press, because they're very vibrant, and all these threats about changing the libel laws cannot really come to pass in any way that I can imagine. So I think they're fine. The judiciary, there have been attacks on its independence, and there have been times when Commander-in-Chief denigrates a particular judge by name, and maybe that's intimidating to a particular person, but you know what? The founders were very smart, and they set up a system in which to become a federal judge in this country, you'd like tenure, everybody loves that, but the good part of that is they can withstand criticism and being berated by the most powerful person in the country, the most powerful person in the world, and they just do their job. So if you're, a federal district court judge or a circuit court judge, a Supreme Court justice, who gets on the wrong side of the president, you keep your job. If you're a U.S. attorney who does that, you get a podcast. So it's a totally different, branch of government. In order for there to be justice done that people believe is justice, there has to be independence. And what independence means is not just independence from politics, not just independence from mob think, but independence from bias, independence from all sorts of things that might lead you to do something that don't fall within the facts and the law. And there was always naturally back and forth between the Southern District of New York and what we call Main Justice and the other U.S. Attorney's offices. Some people thought we were a little bit rogue. I don't think we ever were. To my knowledge, we never defied a direct order from the Attorney General. I got scolded by the Attorney General on a not very regular basis. But we thought it was our job in our district to figure out the best way to deploy our resources, to do the best we could to hold people accountable, should be to keep the city and the larger environments of New York City safe. And to the extent you see a withering of that, and you see a bleeding of politics into law enforcement, I think that's a problem. And part of the reason that I've joined this effort with the Brennan Center and with Governor Christie Tyler in a bipartisan effort to try to talk about what norms we should maybe codify into hard laws, so that our institutions are not undermined so much. I think I have the greatest fear about is the law enforcement function, because the press is protected by the First Amendment. The courts are protected by, as I described, the structure of the Constitution, and like tenure. This thing that we have, the sacred thing that I think is sort of at the center of faith and justice, is just a norm. It's a tradition. There's nothing really, unless you can, sort of pull out meat of the bones and call it instruction. There's not that much that actually strictly lawfully prohibits politicians from getting involved in who goes to jail, and who gets a buy. And I think once you start bleeding that together, even though it's not enshrined in hard statutes and laws, you start to look like a banana republic. And so I think the independence of Bob Mueller, the independence of Jeff Sessions, the independence before him of Eric Holder, the independence that I showed is incredibly important. Look, there's a reason why in part I don't have a job. I don't know if it's directly related, but people may know. The President of the United States called me on March 9th, 2017. And I didn't think it was appropriate for me to talk to him because he's the president, and I'm the U.S. attorney. I didn't know what he wanted to talk about. I didn't have a good feeling about it. And I, as the U.S. attorney there, had jurisdiction over, among other things, the residences, the businesses of not only the president, not only the First Lady, but also associates and family members. And I didn't want it to ever look like I was in any way compromised by having a phone call with somebody who was the president of the United States of America. I didn't call him back. And 22 hours later, I was asked for my resignation. And even though I don't know for a fact they're related, I believe that they are. And even though it was the best job I've ever had, and I had a lot of unfinished business, I'm more proud of that decision not to return the phone call to show the independence of me as a person and that place as an institution.
There's a lot of discussions about things like tax returns and transparency generally for people who are going to take public office. But then there's also the counterweight of citizens' right to privacy. There's nothing actually enshrined in law that says you must release tax returns, although I know a few states are toying with the idea of requiring it to be on the ballot. Do you have any take on that? Do you think that once, if you decide running for office, you should just expect not to have any sort of private life?
Yeah, so I don't know about that. She knows some private life. That's another issue with running for office also.
Sure.
So in connection with this task force in favor of democracy that I have, that I co-chair with former governor of this great state, Christy Tubbleman, who's a Republican. We have 8 or 9 members. We have Republicans, we have Democrats, we have Chuck Hagel, former Republican senator. We have former Solicitor General of the Obama administration. We have former Governor Mike Castle, moderate Republican from Delaware. We have a whole bunch of folks who decided to come together and figure out what are the ways that we can urge lawmakers to put some things on the books that prevent bad things from happening in the future. It's not a partisan effort. Half Republican, half Democrat. And the inspiration of that is a little bit of that's actually what's going on now, but it's not something that's foreign. And maybe if you have your government folks, students here, they may remember that one of the first norms that was developed by the first president of the country, George Washington, who would have been anointed a king, right? He would have been elected as many times as he wanted to, because he was one of the founders of the country. And he served one term. He's like, all right, I'll do another one. He served a second term. Do I have this right, Doctor? He served a second term, and they said, I'm out. Right? And that was not in the Constitution. And every single president after that said, I'll do 2 and I'm out. And then Franklin Roosevelt decided to come along. He's like, I'm still good here. He does a third, he does a fourth. And Franklin Roosevelt, bear in mind, in relevance to this is, some people would say he's perhaps our greatest president. Others would say that he's perhaps the reason that we don't speak German or Japanese. So he was a popular president and an important president. And even so, there was an effort on the part of people from both sides of the aisle to say, I'm not sure we want the next guy who thinks he's great to stick around for 4 terms. And they did the hardest thing you could do in democracy and in law in this country. They amended the Constitution. Jack Kennedy appointed his brother. It seems bizarre today, right? As a attorney general, and he was a very good attorney general, and he's a hero of mine. But then people decided, you know what? Maybe it's not so cool that dude in the White House has his brother dude in the Justice Department for all these independence reasons I'm discussing, and they changed it. So, our efforts are along those lines. It's a little bit, sparked by things that are going on now, but it's forward-looking, right? So, a lot of the norms that are being broken by this president, whether it's not releasing your tax returns or hiring your family into the office, you don't want the next person, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, I think to cross those lines. And so one of the things we're going to be considering in our first report we're announcing out of Washington on Tuesday so look for that in the news, is going to be addressing the issue of tax returns and what we think are appropriate guidelines for people, not just guidelines for people to release their tax returns, but actually mandated by law. The issue of the pardon, right? It has been a tradition for a long, long time that while it is true the president has unlimited pardon power, basic, right, their pardon, it has been exercised in a way that's consistent with certain principles. Now, it's been violated. Bill Clinton, I think, was the person who pardoned at the end of his term, Mark Rich. And to answer both the question about norms and also the earlier question you asked about the independence of my office, the response to Bill Clinton pardoning Mark Rich, who was being prosecuted by my office, who was the financier, who was a fugitive from an indictment by the Southern District of New York, when my predecessor, Mary Jo White, was the U.S. attorney, who had been appointed by Bill Clinton. You know what she did? She opened an investigation against Bill Clinton, the president who appointed her, because rule of law matters and because independence matters. Now you have a president who, even I think in some ways, more out of the norm of what President Clinton did in that case, never consults with something called a pardon attorney. There's an actual pardon attorney in a pardon attorney's office in the Justice Department who evaluates and gives guidance. They don't decide, but they evaluate and they give guidance on who might be right for a pardon, what the considerations are. They conduct a background inquiry. I used to get asked all the time about people from my office whose lawyers were seeking a pardon from the president. Give us information so we know what kind of recommendations to make to the White House. And you gather the information, maybe there's stuff that people don't know. And you have a president now who's going out of his way to pardon people, including one person who I prosecuted out of my office, without any consultation. So it seems to be done on a whim. That is his right. But I think reasonable people who care about the honest and equal enforcement of justice, I think have a right to be worried about that, especially if it can mean that the president might want to pardon people who are A, family members, B, himself, there's no debate about that, or C, people who are in a position to provide testimony against him. And even though he might have that right, it's a tall burden to bear to try to say that that's obstruction. So one of the things we're considering is whether or not Congress should pass a law requiring at a minimum, some explanation whenever the president decides to exercise a certain kind of power. We think that passes muster constitutionally, but certain branches of government have a lot of power. Presidents have a lot of power, and largely they exercise them, as we're discovering in recent times, on the honor system. The conflict of interest laws don't apply the same way to the president as they do to everybody else. So all those things are under consideration. It's hard to do something. You're not going to pass a law, and something that make people upset. There's nothing you can do about legally. Right? You're not going to pass a law saying, the next president shouldn't tweet after midnight. As an example. There's certain things you can't do. You're not going to pass a law saying that a president shouldn't call the press the enemy of the people. But there are some things you can do.
When you mentioned the constitutionality of some of these proposals, and that sort of leads me to a question here, and I had something similar as well, but Luke Notably's was parent. What, in your opinion, is the greatest risk to the country posed by the likely increased partisanship of the Supreme Court? And sort of along those lines, is there other ways to fix that process without amending the Constitution?
Yeah, I don't know if the Supreme Court is partisan. I separate partisanship from ideology. There's kinds of ideology. There's new ideology. There's political ideology. There are people who have been appointed by one party president and then have ruled in ways that are associated with the ideology of the opposing party. I think that's less likely to happen. So if the spirit of the question is a little bit more along the lines of presidents of particular parties have gotten much better at making sure that the person that they appoint is really lined up with their sort of political principles, whether you want to call it partisanship or ideology they have. There are Republican presidents, as your history students know, who have lamented the fact that they have put on the court people who have not been as conservative as they wanted. It typically hasn't happened in the other direction where liberal presidents have appointed people who turn radically to the right. I think it's a little more common in the other direction. And I think part of the issue is the confirmation process and how partisan that has become. And I don't think those views are. I think I had work done the last 2 days, so if you haven't, don't feel bad. it was a terrible process, I think, when I was in the Senate, and worked on 2 confirmation hearings, as I mentioned, Roberts and Alito. And I think it's only gotten worse. I think a lot of terrible things were said by a lot of different people over the last couple of days. I think what Brett Kavanaugh was not completely incorrect about, and was incorrect about some things, was that the process is broken. It's broken for a long time. And we didn't used to have hearings until fairly recently in American history. And whether they shed light or not, I don't know. I hope they shed a lot of light. I mean, I think that related to your question, somebody said something really wise in the last couple of days. They said, this issue of whether Brett Kavanaugh gets on the court, we'll talk more about that. It's not a binary question of is he going to get on, is he not going to get on, or is he going to the court, or is he not going to the court. And the additional question is, depending on what happens with this nomination, what is going to be the view of hundreds of millions of people in America about that institution, right? Because those things matter too. And what I've been very heartened by in connection with this task force and in talking to a lot of people who are Republicans, who are concerned, I don't consider the president to be Republican, I don't know what he is, but who are Republicans, who are conservatives, like Bill Kristol and David Frum and Steve Schmidt, who I said on my show, and Cole Wallace, who I said on my show, and all sorts of people who believe that there are things that are more important than your party, who believe there are things like decency and like the free press and truth matter more. There's a guy, Ben Wiss, who's on my program not too long ago, who has a great blog and writes a lot about legal issues, who says, he doesn't like what's going on in Washington at the moment. He's a conservative. And he said, look, I'm a national security state apologist. And I will go back to being an apologist. He said, I have a lot of these liberal people on the left who support me because I have a particular critique I make of the folks in the White House. He said, that doesn't change who I am. He said that as soon as we return to some semblance of democratic norms and decency, in his words, I will go back to being an apologist for the national security state. So I'm hardened a little bit, relatedly to your question, but there are lots and lots of people who are coming together and having conversations about what's good for the country, whether or not they agree on taxes, whether or not they agree on tariffs, whether or not they agree on even reproductive rights. There's lots and lots of issues that people can differ about, and they should. That's healthy for democracy and healthy for politics. It's probably healthy also for there to be disagreement on the Supreme Court. But so long as certain things are beyond discussion, as long as certain things are universally held, I mentioned some of them, then I think we'll be okay. I mean, we should not have, my old boss said, we should say about the court, we talked with the anchor among members of the court, he was, a court with 9 Brennans would be a terrible court. And the court with 9 Scalias would be a terrible court. And I thought that was a wise thing to say. And maybe there's some folks who want everyone on the court to be like them. But I don't think you get good results if everyone thinks the same way. I mean, it'd be good to get somebody on the court who didn't go to Yale or Harvard Law School, just get some diversity in that court as well. But I'm worried about it, but I also feel somewhat hardened because lots of people come together to try to fix it.
So, sort of bouncing off of that, another audience question from Dr. and Mrs. Richard Daniels, father, parents,
Did you know I was going to call you out?
I didn't know I was going to tell you, so the third question, I'm going to paraphrase it, is, would you take on Judge Kavanaugh, but more of my question is, do you think he fits into that category of conservatives, we'll say, who are thinking of the country or the party?
I know Brett a little bit. We have met, a few times. He and I have very close mutual friends. And I've always known him to be a nice person. And my interactions with him, half a dozen or so over the course of, 14 years, have been always, pleasant and decorous. I, like a lot of people, troubled by some of the things that happened in the hearing. I'm troubled by credibility issues. I'm also troubled, separate apart from the accusations that are made, which we can talk about if you want, on what he's going to do for the balance of the court. I'm troubled by the fact that Merrick Garland should be in one of those seats right now. I looked them up recently, recited them on the show. I think the founders thought at the beginning, didn't maybe appreciate how long people were going to live. So I could say good things about life tenure for a while on the part of the court, but there are limits to that. And we sometimes get is because of the vagaries of when people kick the bucket. It doesn't always match over time. The court doesn't always parallel over time what elections have done, right? And I apologize if I get this wrong, but it's something like this. In the last 50 years, there have been 18, something like 18 Supreme Court vacancies. And I was surprised myself when I counted them up. 14, I think fully 14, 13 or 14, have been made by Republican presidents. And that's not, over the course of 4 or 5 years, it's over the course of 50 years. Now, the reason people have not freaked out as much as they might, and that statistic is not known to everybody like the back of their hand, is because a lot of Republicans made, in their minds, these political mistakes, right? You had Berger, and you had a few other justices, Ruby Souter and others, who didn't turn the court as much as they might have, and they don't make that mistake anymore. And so, Reagan had 4, Carter has 0. Trump already is going to have 2, maybe he'll have more. So, I think there's an imbalance on the board. I think Kavanaugh is something who probably should the court. I think the important thing with respect to the allegations, I think people are forgetting that is important is a lot of people are focusing on what the standard of proof is, right, with respect to the allegations of sexual assault and everything else. And you see a lot of people on one side, Lindsey Graham I also know, and I used to like him. And he keeps saying things like, you couldn't get an arrest warrant, or you couldn't charge a criminal case against Brett Kavanaugh based on the evidence you have. And yeah, he's right. That's not the standard. You have a basic entitlement as an American to freedom and liberty. God bless you, right? And so that's why, in part, going to very basic civics, if I want to take your freedom away when I'm the U.S. attorney, I need to prove that with a very high burden, and that burden in our system is proving beyond a reasonable doubt. Which means if I'm close and you're guilty, you don't go to prison. That's not the standard for other things, right? You don't have an entitlement to be in the Supreme Court the same way you have an entitlement to freedom. And all these people who are yelling about the unfairness of people in the Senate making decisions based on very credible, multiple accusations of this kind, I think are being somewhat disingenuous. And the way I think about it is, you can use the job interview example, which I think is good, but you take it back further in time. I guarantee you, the Brett Kavanaugh was vetted a little bit. And if in the vetting process, these allegations have become known, the same ones, and to the same degree, and to the same scope, and President Trump knew about it, and he consulted with Lindsey Graham, who gets red in the face now about all this, for reasons that I don't fully grasp the extent of it. I guarantee you, Lindsey Graham, at that point temporally, right before the nomination, would have said, you can't nominate this guy, because we have doubts about this guy. So I don't understand how you don't have an entitlement the day before the nomination, right? And the day after the nomination, you have an entitlement. What they have is a political problem, right? And it causes people to change their arguments about the law, about democracy, about the system, because they have a political preference. And, and so that's why they have to make these arguments now. But to my mind, nothing has really changed. If a person comes in for the job interview, and you have lots of reasons to be concerned about them, and there are allegations, no teacher would be hired at the school. If there are credible allegations, after some inquiry, I would hope, potentially, and you might, right? You can decide to have a different standard. You can decide to have a standard in hiring, or unless you have proof beyond a reasonable doubt that allegations against someone who's applying for a job are absolutely true. I'm not going to hire that person. People aren't going to hire, a babysitter or someone to take care of your children if you've heard from 4 people making allegations about that person. There's no entitlement to that particular thing. So I just think that's a confusion that people have for political purposes, and it's not quite right.
I think that's fine. I'm going to try to ask you 2 questions fairly quickly. One of them is, take my own initiative here. There are a number of students here. I've said that before. There's no teachers here. The students can't vote yet by and large. I know you oftentimes advocate vote. That's the fastest way, the best way to affect change. But what might be some advice you would give first to students the age of 18, if they want to get involved, if they don't think they have the ability or the time. And the second part to that, what advice might you give to, say, history teachers, if you wanted to help them better explain to the students what they need to know about what's going on in the world?
Yeah. Great last beer. Don't brag about beer. Look, the other heartening thing about all this stuff happening in the world is I'm less worried about the young people, in fact. And I don't know if that'll translate into voting, but my God, my kids were never really, I have 17-year-old, 15-year-old, and 13-year-old. That's a lot of eye rolling. Who, on their own, without discussion with me or my wife, with any product from us, and obviously I've been public service, we're very civic oriented, and we have the youth on all the time, and we talk about it at dinner. They decided to take signs. They decided they want to march, right? The Women's March, and in the days after the Parkland shooting, and some of my favorite people to follow on the internet are some of the Parkland kids. I've been on both sides. There's the conservative people who have a view about guns that I disagree with, but they're active, and people on the other side of the gun debate as well. And so I have not seen, I grew up in the 80s, and the biggest problem we had was how to walk outside over here without getting goose poop under your shoes. We still have that problem. And these kids today seem to know a lot more about what's going on, care very deeply, get involved, and so I would just hope that translates into voting and being knowledgeable about the candidates and who they are. And I think for the history teachers, I know this place has an excellent reputation for teaching kind of education I got. And I'm sure this is not the case, but I sometimes would, there's some places that are very conservative in how they deal with the classroom, and there's not as much talking about what they can do outside the classroom, and not as much encouragement of people to get involved civically outside the classroom, whether it's working with government leaders or figuring out ways to participate as activists in whatever view they have. I think that's a sort of a delicate balance on how you promote certain social involvement and activism of a particular ideological stripes. You don't look like you're favoring one point of view over another. But I think there should be tremendous encouragement for young people to get involved in their communities on whatever issue they think about, they care about, and that affect their lives. And the tragic thing that some of the activism you're seeing on the part of young people has happened because people come into schools like this, they're supposed to be safe havens, and kids have been murdered. And the upside, you can use a term like that, it's awakened a lot of people, a lot of young people, and it's awakened a lot of older people who see the young people.
So I have time for one last question. Other than the goose food, but I know you'd like to end your podcast with something that struck you. Think about. So thinking back to your days at Randy, what was something that struck you on a regular basis? Was something about your mother that you would like to continue seeing, that meant a lot to you?
So I love the football team. I thought we could. Great record, never a loss. Like not even a loss. That's a great question. And I think what I say is that the kids who are here, the school sometimes is not great. Like, I have a fond memory of school that I remember feeling when I was in school, and I became a valedictorian. It's hard and difficult because a lot of stuff you think you don't need to know. It's very stressful. It's a great education here. And my answer goes back to something I said at the beginning about the importance of hard work and meticulousness and rigor. And I'm assuming the curriculum has expanded and become more diverse. But there's a core here that has served me really well, incredibly well. And part of that core was how I got taught to write and how to communicate in the English language. So basically, I've been making my career over the last year and a half in particular, and in many ways, for many, many years, based on my ability to run my mouth and to write words. And I didn't learn that in law school. I learned that in college. I learned that here. Through teachers that I look back at Thomas, but lots of other great teachers who made you understand how you put a sentence together, how you put a paragraph together, but why that's so important, and why it takes work, right? I'm having this conversation right now with my daughter who's doing her college essay, and she's a brilliant student. And I'm telling her, you know what, and I'm writing this book, and it's agonizing. You know, I was taught here the importance of picking the right word. I forgot to say this, picking the right word, not a second cousin, right? And writing is hard, and communicating well takes work. It can, I do chapters of the book in an afternoon, and there are other chapters of the book that have taken me on and off 3 months because I can't find the right word. And that's what we need to find. And then also, you know, the hard work and the importance of it, the rigor and precision is incredibly important. And if you learn science, people think, well, I don't have to learn how to write well or communicate well. The exercise of being rigorous and precise in your language is not just about the writing. It's also rigor and precision in your thinking. Right? You learn over time that in order for me to actually have an idea, I have to try to flesh it out on paper and write it down. And if you can't do that, then I don't think you can be successful, as successful as possible in any field at all. And I also think, to continue, that's important not just in your jobs. You know, we're all focused on our jobs. That's important in how you relate to your neighbors, and how you relate to fellow citizens, and how you debate politics, and how you choose who your leaders are, and how you assess, you know, the words, the truthfulness, the credibility, the persuasiveness of other people. Because if you had had the experience of understanding the rigor of language and the importance of communicating thoughts with precision and not with laziness, then you're better able to, I think, be a better citizen because you will choose better the people who should lead you. So that's my thought.
Thank you for sharing. Thanks. I think it's a little please bag for you.
I haven't heard this back.
That doesn't constitute a bribe. Thank you to Marty Giovanni, who is our moderator for today. And thank you to all of you for being here today. And civic engagement, public engagement that I know Preet spoke so much about is exemplified by this kind of rigorous discussion, debate, you know, based on a tremendous career and experiences. I appreciate his being here today. So thank you.